Tonight, the costly deal leaving retirees to pay more for aged care. I'm Jessica Van Vonderen. This is ABC News Queensland. A three-decade fight for justice for a wrongly convicted Townsville man. An officer taking part in a ride to honour fallen police killed in a motorbike crash. And key Lions defender Jack Payne to play in Saturday night's AFL semi-final against GWS. Good evening. Many Australians will have to pay thousands more for aged care from July next year, with sweeping changes set to pass Parliament. The federal government and opposition finally reached a deal today aimed at making the system more sustainable, affecting those going into aged care facilities or accessing care at home. Here's political reporter Evelyn Manfield.
After months of negotiations,
we're announcing the greatest improvement in aged care in 30 years.
Those already in the system won't have to pay more, but new entrants will face changes from next July. For example, a fully supported pensioner with few assets would pay up to $300 more, a part pensioner who owns a home up to $4,700 more, while a self-funded retiree could be hit with an extra $13,400 more a year.
Those with means did say they were happy to pay more as long as they could see it was delivering quality services, that there was transparency about where the money was going and that the provider would uphold their rights.
At the moment, we're not building anywhere near the new beds we need. We're closing more than we open and we're not able to refurbish them.
The amount someone spends across their lifetime will be raised too. For non-clinical care, the cap will lift from about $80,000 to $130,000.
The government has agreed to these caps that we've forced them into accepting.
The proposal, which still needs to pass Parliament, will also see a new support at home program.
We are re-gearing the entire system of aged care in this country to be about supporting you at home.
The government had promised criminal penalties for providers that allowed or covered up repeated abuse and neglect. But the opposition feared that would spark an exodus and ultimately Labor wanted bipartisan support. Instead, it's promising civil penalties for providers that breach standards. Yvonne Buter's mother died in aged care after falling out of bed numerous times. Months later, she lost her father after a wound wasn't treated properly.
That people aren't harmed in aged care, that would be the priority. But then if they are, that there are consequences.
Aged care that's safe and sustainable, a major challenge with the number of Australians over 85 set to triple in a generation. Evelyn Manfield, ABC News, Canberra.
A Townsville man spent 4.5 years behind bars for an armed bank robbery he didn't commit. A Queensland court has ruled Terry Irving was the victim of a malicious prosecution and ordered he be paid compensation. Today, he returned to court, but says no amount of money will make up for the pain and injustice.
It's been a 3-decade pursuit for justice, and one that is still ongoing.
I've been exonerated, I've been vindicated, and I've been violated. And the state of Queensland refuses to acknowledge their role in this.
Terry Irving was wrongly convicted of an armed bank robbery in Cairns in 1993. The Indigenous man was acquitted by the High Court after 4.5 years in prison, and the charges against him later dropped entirely. Mr Irving sued the state government and the investigating police officer. In 2021, the Court of Appeal found the police officer acted maliciously when she held him on charges of accessory to armed robbery with the intent of obtaining evidence to slap him with the more severe charge. Today, lawyers argued how much he should receive in compensation from his malicious prosecution.
31 years since I was incarcerated for something I never done. It's taken this long to be vindicated for that.
His barrister said Mr Irving's time in the watch house has had a catastrophic impact on his life. There was a lot of violence amongst the prisoners. There was nowhere to sleep. He slept on a plastic mattress on the floor. But the defendant's lawyers submitted he was only held on the accessory charges for 7 days. What Mr Irving wants more than money, more than anything, is an apology and acknowledgement from the state government for what he's been through. His barrister told the court there's been a complete lack of remorse from either of the defendants. Attorney General Yvette Darth refused to comment on the matter as the case was still before the courts.
No amount of money can make up for the pain, the suffering, the lack of compassion.
Now, the wait for the judge's decision. But Mr Irving says he prays and hopes
it stops with me.
Laura Lavelle, ABC News, Brisbane.
A veteran Gold Coast policeman has been killed in a crash on a remembrance ride for fallen officers. 58-year-old Senior Sergeant Brendan Wiblin died yesterday in a single motorcycle crash near Glen Innes in New South Wales. He was taking part in the annual ride from Brisbane to Canberra, which set off yesterday.
It is almost beyond comprehension that this off-duty officer should lose his life just as he is engaged in a memorial event in honour of other fallen police officers. For the officer's family, this must be the most extraordinarily difficult time.
A small group of Army officers will have their Afghanistan service decorations removed for failing to prevent alleged war crimes during their command. The Defence Minister's long-awaited decision has sparked anger across the veterans community as authorities continue to gather evidence for possible prosecutions. Here's Defence correspondent Andrew Green.
Government response to the Brereton report? I haven't seen it. Haven't seen it at all?
An international army conference in Melbourne.
We recognise the timeless challenges of land warfare.
Is overshadowed by a long-awaited announcement in Parliament.
This will always be a matter of national shame.
The Defence Minister confirming Distinguished Service medals will be stripped from some current and former commanders who failed to prevent alleged war crimes in Afghanistan.
Combat has shown that our soldiers are capable of great courage and bravery under fire. It has also shown that we can do great wrong on the battlefield.
The decision coming almost 4 years after damning findings of the Brereton report into the conduct of Australian Special Forces soldiers during the war against the Taliban, and just days after the release of the Veteran Suicide Royal Commission.
How insensitive, how bloody insensitive to do this.
The identities of officers being punished are being withheld on privacy grounds, but former Defence Chief Angus Campbell, who first recommended removing medals, will be keeping his own.
It's a small number of people that we are talking about.
His actions today, in effect, spit at the feet of those brave young Australians, the 26,000 of them who went to Afghanistan over 2 decades and put their lives on the line.
That anger is shared widely across Army ranks as, behind the scenes, investigators continue to gather evidence for possible prosecutions, a process the government says could take up to a decade.
The long shadow of Afghanistan will continue to shape the context for our Army for some years to come.
Australia's longest war still has chapters to be written. Andrew Green, ABC News, Melbourne.
Labor and the LNP have traded barbs on the final sitting day of Queensland Parliament ahead of next month's state election. 9 MPs aren't recontesting the October poll and delivered emotional farewell speeches.
It's the end of term for the state's 93 MPs.
I know it is the last day of school, but I don't want this to turn into muck-up day.
After 4 years, Queensland's 57th Parliament is drawing to a close and the election race is ramping up.
Does the Premier accept he is just not up to the job of leading Queensland?
I have spent
Order, members.
the last 9 months as Queensland's Premier listening to Queenslanders and delivering for them.
It was the last chance for the opposition leader to face off with the Premier in the House, and he seized on youth crime.
Does the Premier accept his vote to weaken youth justice laws created the youth crime crisis and that time's up for Labor to fix it?
Since I became Premier, the community safety plan that we have implemented is working. And it is driving down offending.
The LNP was determined to remind voters Labor has been in power for 9 years.
It's time up for Labor.
The Premier returned serve, attacking David Crisafulli's small target election strategy.
The leader of the opposition, he's the great invisible man of Queensland politics. He hopes Queenslanders never really get to know him.
The state's MPs will now head back to their electorates for the final chance to shore up votes ahead of October the 26th. 9 MPs have decided not to run again and delivered their final farewells in the House.
Here's to you, Mrs. Robinson. Jesus loves you more than you will know.
We've been together ever since. She's my rock.
My greatest regret is not having been able to be there for them as much as I'd like to.
The election campaign officially kicks off in a little over 2 weeks. Rachel Stewart, ABC News, Brisbane.
Brisbane's International Airport is getting a multi-billion-dollar makeover. It includes AI-capable security and passport control centres on the upper atrium level, self-service check-ins and bag drops, with new technology allowing laptops to be left in bags when passing through security. And there'll be new cafes and retail outlets. In a nod to history, existing tiles that came from volcanic rock quarried at Kangaroo Point in the 1880s will be repurposed into bench tops and furniture. The project should be completed by 2027.
Guarantees are very difficult to give, but we've got very good partners in our construction firms. We are experienced in delivering very large projects, so we are very confident that we can deliver the project on time.
A day after the US presidential debate, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump have again met face-to-face, this time at a memorial to mark the September 11 terrorist attacks. The two political rivals briefly shook hands in a rare joint appearance with President Joe Biden. Vice President Harris and former President Trump stood together at the Ground Zero site in New York just hours after their first debate. Many polls say Kamala Harris was the winner, although Mr. Trump praised his own performance.
When you don't win, it's like a fighter. When a fighter has a bad fight, gets knocked out or loses the fight, the first thing he says is, we want a rematch. So we won the debate according to every poll, every single poll. I think that, are we going to do a rematch? I just don't know.
An Israeli airstrike on a school-turned-aid facility in central Gaza has killed at least 18 people, including 6 UN employees. It's the highest death toll among UNRWA staff in a single incident. And a warning, this report contains distressing images and details.
For the 5th time, a UN school-turned-shelter in the Nuseirat refugee camp is hit by Israeli airstrikes. A man collects body parts in a plastic bag as he inspects the destruction.
My children are still missing. 4 of my children. I do not know where my daughters are. Where is my wife?
Nearby, first responders try to retrieve the bodies of the Eid family so they can be buried.
The house of our neighbours, the Eid family, was targeted. There were about 7 martyrs, 4 children, 2 women and a young man.
The Nuseirat shelter in central Gaza is one of many run by the UN Palestinian Refugee Agency, or UNRWA. It's home to around 12,000 displaced people. UNRWA says 6 of its workers were killed in the strike.
This was the single deadliest day for our agency in the 75-year history. But all told, we've lost 220 of our colleagues to date to this conflict.
The Israeli military says it was targeting Hamas militants planning attacks from inside the school.
We must condemn firmly what was the horrible terror attacks that Hamas has produced. But then afterwards, we have witnessed a series of military interventions by Israel in Gaza with a level of death and destruction that has no parallel in my time as Secretary General.
Gaza's health ministry says more than 41,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since the war began. Chelsea Edwards, ABC News.
As voters in Indonesia prepare for regional elections, overdevelopment will be high on the agenda in Bali. Politicians are proposing a temporary ban on new tourism builds as the island grapples with a growing influx of so-called digital nomads and foreign property investors.
It's been voted one of the most beautiful beaches in the world, but Bali's Kelingking Beach is about to undergo a controversial transformation. The local village authorities have brought in a Chinese company to build a 182-metre high elevator and viewing platform.
Once it's built, would you ride on the glass elevator?
No, never.
Never?
Never.
That's how strongly you feel about it?
Never. Never.
Senator and activist Nilu Jelantik is part of a growing pushback in Bali against what she sees as excessive development. And it's Bali's famous rice terraces where the biggest changes are happening.
Farmers are giving up, growing rice, very little income, and sell the land, tons of money.
There's a villa boom taking place, partly fueled by foreign investors. Conservationists worry that serene inland areas like Woodward might go the way of coastal hotspots like Canggu, where mega clubs and apartment blocks compete for space.
You have a lot of celebrities coming to Bali. It's like the Asian Ibiza at the moment, so people love it.
Sales rep Arthur Richard is from a Ukrainian-owned developer. He says they're employing 900 people and helping Bali's economy. It's a tricky issue for the island's politicians to deal with, given visitors drive up to 80% of Bali's economy.
I think it comes back to if there are people who want to come to Bali, we're not going to reject them, as long as visitors who come follow the rules of Indonesia.
Development will be in focus as Bali's voters choose a new governor in November. Leaders who'll be tasked with trying to preserve the culture and environment of an island that so many people want a piece of. Bill Birtles, ABC News, Bali.
Australia's most remote music festival, held in far western Queensland, has been cancelled for 2025. The Big Red Bash, which has run for 11 years, draws thousands of people to Birdsville. Organisers say they're taking a breather with plans to return in 2026. This year, ticket sales were down by thousands on the previous year, and wet weather caused havoc for the second year in a row. The Mayor says it'll be a difficult tourist season.
It's going to be a really big blow, but we're going to have to get creative and work out ways to get our visitors out here again next year.
Digital giants could be fined for allowing harmful misinformation to remain online under new powers to be given to the National Communications Regulator. The federal government says its updated bill will force platforms such as Facebook and Google to adhere to their own codes of conduct around removing false content. Labor's draft misinformation laws attracted almost 3,000 public submissions, many of which were worried about an attack on free speech and an exemption for political content. Political material will now be included under the laws. If passed, the government says its bill won't impinge on free speech.
We are setting a very high threshold for what kind of information online constitutes mis or disinformation. And this needs to be content that is seriously harmful and also basically verifiably false.
The boss of Channel 9 says he'll leave the network at the end of the month. Mike Sneesby's tenure as CEO has been marred by a sinking share price, job cuts and serious allegations against former executives.
Mike Sneesby was criticised for carrying the Olympic torch in Paris as the network's journalists were preparing to strike. Now the chief executive has announced that he is standing down in just a few weeks.
Whether he jumped or whether he was pushed, it's a great move for Nine.
Mike Sneesby told staff that this year has been one of the most challenging in my career, where our resilience has been tested. There has been protests over pay, job losses, 200 job cuts, falling ad revenue and the exit of Peter Costello as chairman after this moment. Nine's culture is also under scrutiny after serious, inappropriate behaviour allegations were levelled against its news boss. Darren Wick has since left, reportedly with a big payout. Rival Network 7 is also battling sexual harassment allegations.
There's no question there has been a culture, particularly in commercial television, of sexual harassment and sexism.
A report into Nine's culture is expected for October. Mike Sneesby is stepping down on September 30, meaning he won't be in the top job when this long-awaited report is released.
We know it's a pretty deep and extensive review of behaviours of not just management but colleagues across the company.
Nine will be run by its Chief Financial Officer while a successor is found. Matt Stanton has already had a tough year, with Nine stock down 40% this year alone.
It's been a tough time for Channel 9, but it's been a tough time for all commercial television and media.
Nine's board and management declined interviews. Amelia Turzon, ABC News.
To Finance Now, here's Alan Kohler.
Inflation in America isn't quite back to the 2% that the Federal Reserve would like it to be, but it's close and getting there. Headline inflation is down to 2.5%, and core inflation, where they take out food and energy, was steady at 3.2%. A US rate cut, though, seems locked in for next week, but it probably won't be the big one. It'll just be the usual 0.25%. And the only problem America still has with inflation is housing. This chart shows core inflation with and without housing. So what they call shelter inflation, mainly rent, is still above 5%. But the decline in headline CPI was well received by the markets, and the S&P 500 rose 1%, the Nasdaq 2%, and the Nikkei in Japan 3.5%. One negative on the US market last night was Trump Media and Technology Group, the company controlled by the former president that owns his social media thing called Truth Social. It's seen as a way to bet on whether he'll win the election, because if he does, his company will probably make a lot of money. And, well, the price slumped after the debate and Taylor Swift's endorsement of Kamala Harris. Investors couldn't decide which of those was worse for the Republican candidate. The Australian market zipped up 1% with solid gains by banks and miners. Nine entertainment shares fell quite a lot following the resignation of CEO Mike Sneesby, but that's not very unusual for this stock, especially in the 3.5 years since Mr Sneesby took over in April 2021, since when it has fallen 58%. And that's not normally the thing that encourages CEO longevity. On commodity markets, iron ore and oil and copper went up, gold fell, and the Australian dollar went up because the US dollar fell. And that's finance.
Coming up on 7:30, is blast exposure leaving Navy clearance divers with brain injuries?
They are regularly exposed to blasts both in training environments and when they are deployed.
My long-term memory seems to be okay, but what I did 5 minutes ago I couldn't tell you.
You know something's wrong but you can't put a finger on it.
There is clearly a medical cause for this.
Also, I'll speak to the Minister for Aged Care, Annika Wells.
Chris Fagan has urged his men to play with freedom on Saturday night in their sudden death semi-final with the Giants in Sydney. The Lions coach believes it's why Brisbane are even in the premiership race after their season was on life support.
The Premiership Cup stopping by the River City on its national tour. But soon these Lions hope Brisbane will be its new home.
I think we all agree that the football that the Lions are capable of playing, they can beat anyone on their day.
Last week it was the Blues. On Saturday they're hoping to be giant killers.
We know the Lions are in terrific form. You know, having kept Carlton virtually goalless in a half of footy is an outstanding defensive effort.
And the Lions are expecting to have their defensive pillar in Sydney, with Jack Payne named in the side despite concerns over a knee injury.
You need to be over 90%. Most players hover around that most weeks. I don't know too many blokes that go onto the field that are 100%.
Payne wasn't there in round 22 when the Giants fought back from 30 points down to put a big dent in Brisbane's top four hopes.
I think we've managed to play pretty well against them. We've needed to play our best.
When we played the Giants and we played Collingwood, I felt we were back to trying a little bit too hard. Learn a good lesson there.
It's why Fagan wants his Lions to play with the freedom that inspired a 9-game winning streak and season revival.
We don't feel like we've got a hell of a lot to lose. You know, we came from a long way back to sort of get into finals.
I think the pressure was on them at round 11. They were 4.5 wins and their season was done. So I think once you push through that, everything else is just a bonus.
The 63-year-old Lions boss looks likely to be rewarded with a contract extension.
There'll probably come a point in time where maybe I get a bit worn out from it or the players get a bit worn out from me. We haven't arrived at that point at the moment, so we'll just keep forging ahead.
And late today, Jared Lyons announced he'll hang up his boots at season's end after 14 years. Jessica Stewart, ABC News.
The NRL Finals kick off tomorrow and several injured stars are pushing their bodies to the limit. Manly's Tom Trbojevic says he'll face the Bulldogs on Sunday and deal with the pain later.
Tom Trbojevic is safe and sound at Brookvale Oval, but he may not be against the Bulldogs.
Luckily, they have some painkilling injections that make things go away.
The star fullback is playing just 2 weeks after tearing his AC joint in Manly's first finals campaign in 3 years.
You want to be the best player you can be, and these big games you need to prove yourself. So it's not really external pressure, it's more myself just wanting to, be good in a big game.
Luke Brooks is another Sea Eagle with a point to prove. No other NRL player has toiled for as long as he has without playing finals.
Look, at my start of my career, I probably wouldn't have believed it.
The 29-year-old is ending the drought of 229 games in Manly Maroon after making the decision to end his 10-year career with the Tigers.
I feel like it was the right one.
The Sea Eagles broke the Bulldogs the last time these two sides played each other just a couple of weeks ago. If they can pull it off again, they'll get to play the loser of tomorrow night's clash between the Roosters and Penrith.
Beliefs in the 17 players that are going to play tomorrow and the game plan that we've got, so beliefs really high.
And the Roosters pack has one eye on Nathan Cleary, with the Panthers star making his return after injury.
We'll ask the question, but we won't deviate in what we want to do.
Bradman Best hasn't been as lucky with injuries. The centre has been ruled out of Saturday's match against the Cowboys in a huge blow for Newcastle. Bindi Bryce, ABC News.
Weather now with Jenny Woodward. And Jenny, have we seen the last of the showers and storms?
No, not Jess. We've still got plenty of action on the radar. Hello everyone. The showers and storms extended right back to the Carnarvons at the moment, but the heavier falls have been in the southeast corner. We've had 32 millimetres near Waterford, 22 at Goodna, and there's also been a big pocket just east of Gundawindi with 20 to 30 millimetres in the gauges. Victoria snapped her flock of birds enjoying the freshly watered grass at while Warren was enjoying the contrast between the natural and the man-made patterns on the sand at 1770. Cobb checked out the old wooden lighthouse at Point Cleveland, and my dear colleague Jackie is always on duty. At Newstead, she caught Bosun, her golden retriever, at the end of the rainbow. Well, it's been hot in the northwest, 37 the highest at Julia Creek, but we had 29 in Cairns and Townsville. A cooler day in the southwest in the southerly winds, 25 for Charleville, while Applethorpe only got to 16 today under the cloud cover. The city hit 27 before the rain arrived, 29 in Ipswich and 28 in Gympie and on the Gold Coast. Onto the satellite, and we've got the trough system bringing all the activity to the southeast. Earlier today, widespread falls across eastern New South Wales, and we've also got some showers under this cloud cover over central Australia. And the wet weather continues in Hobart too. It's cold there as well, just 14 degrees tomorrow. Canberra's going to dip to -1 in the morning. Melbourne's going to be very hot. Melbourne's going to be cold too, and it's going to be very hot in the north with 38 expected in Broome. The surface trough is going to clear tonight up the coast and then be followed by an upper system tomorrow. So lingering showers are possible anywhere south of about Moranbah and then east of Gundawindi, but they're more likely on the Sunshine Coast and Gari in that southerly flow. Now that blustery change will push strong winds all the way up to the tropics and the southeast Gulf, and the big high that follows is going to bring us some cooler days under clear skies. Let's look at those forecasts, and fog areas are lingering on the coastal fringe south of about Townsville. Some coastal showers too, but staying fine and sunny through the west. Sunny skies over the inland, those gusty southerlies to the west, so the fire dangers will be up, but there'll be some morning fog about the central highlands. In the southeast, partly cloudy, some showers showers about, but clearing from the south, a top of 22 on the Sunshine Coast. Brisbane's expecting light showers tomorrow, more likely in the morning, and quite a cool day, 22 for the city, 24 in Ipswich. Strong wind warning on the bay, southerlies to 30 knots, seas up to 1.5 metres, and then cooler with showers in the days ahead. But Jess, not much rain in it, just a millimetre here or there, and we've got temperatures creeping back up to 28 this time next week.
Okay, Jenny, thank you. That is ABC News to the moment. Thanks for your company tonight. Time for 7:30. Good night.
Good night.